Afternoon to everyone we have in attendance. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar presentation, Agile Portfolio Management, Not Just Another Buzzword, hosted by Keyed In. My name is Sean Dickerson. I am the head of marketing for Keyed In, which means you probably don't have a lot of interest in what I have to say, but that's okay. I'm just the moderator today. I do have to mention, too, with this title slide, we tried to play off the idea of a buzz and put the bees on there, but it ended up looking kind of like a fifth grade maturation presentation. So just to be clear, we are going to talk about agile portfolio management and not the birds and the bees. This is an expanded version of a session that we presented at the Gartner PPM Summit, which, by the way, was the highest attended track session of that summit. So if you were a part of that audience, or if this is new, I think we've got some material that'll be very engaging for you and very helpful. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items. This will be roughly a 1-hour webinar presentation, 45 minutes of which we'll be talking with our panelists, whom I'll introduce in a few moments, and then we'll have some Q&A at the end. Now, all the phone lines will be placed on mute except for the presenters. And so as you have questions, please enter them into the chat box. Anything logistical about the webinar will be answered through that chat box. And then at the end, we'll take some of those questions live as well. This webinar is being recorded, and the slides and the recording will be available after the presentation. All right, so before we get to the meat of today's webinar presentation, let me give you just a little bit of context around how Keyed In views the world. One of the things that we pride ourselves on is really understanding how a PMO works and how its members think. Much of our leadership team and team members are drawn from the industry, folks that have worked in portfolio management, PMOs in the past. And so one of the things that we did at the recent Gartner PPM Summit was we offered some laptop stickers that we think really help to expose the innovation and the psyche of your typical project and portfolio management. One of these said, who else uses a Gantt chart to plan their vacations? Now, we're not going to ask for a show of hands, but you know who you are out in that audience. Another that was popular with the attendees that I think, again, suggested that we understand where you're coming from is this idea that being a program manager is easy because it's like riding a bike, except that the bike is on fire, you're on fire, everything is on fire, and you're in hell. And those of you who are program or portfolio managers on the call, I think, can understand where that's coming from. And then finally, I'm sure there are those of you out there that need a spreadsheet to keep all of your spreadsheets organized. And our hope is that some of the principles that we talk about today will help to get you out of that deadly cycle. All right, so as we begin to address this topic of agile portfolio management, tell me if any of these concepts sound familiar. Sometimes you will hear from our business partners or even internally, we need to be more adaptable. We need to be more value focused. We need to be lean. We need to adopt SAFe. These are all concepts that are associated with the idea of agile portfolio management. But sorting through all of those buzzwords and knowing where to get started can be overwhelming, to say the least. Well, fear not, because help is on the way. Now, our help is not going to come in the form of handsome former NFL quarterback Tim Tebow dressed as a fireman carrying a couple of puppies. We've got something even better. And that is our two panelists for today who are joining me on this webinar. And I'd like them to take just a moment to introduce themselves. First is Tom Doherty. And Tom, why don't you tell us who you are, what you do, and what your most epic sports moment has been over your lifetime, whether it's a sport you participated in or one that you watched?
Wow, great question, and good day, everybody. As Sean introduced, my name is Tom Doherty. I am the Director of Product Management and Portfolio Management at the Riverstone Group. And through those activities, not only am I the side that provides that agile confirmation around how you do product ownership and product management, but also have the overall enterprise portfolio view in terms of how we look at value and priorities across the organization. I do have some certifications within Agile as well as in Six Sigma and SAFe, and happy to be here today to help answer questions and support how we're using the Keyed-in solution.
Great. And how about that epic sports moment?
Oh boy, I knew you were going to remind me of that. Okay, so probably the one that rings the most true for me was as a high school player, American football, getting to go to the state finals and actually winning. But the coup de grace to that was playing at Giant Stadium, surrounded by all of our friends and family. So that was pretty epic for me.
Wow. What was your position?
Offensive and defensive tackle.
Fantastic. That is pretty epic. Excellent. Matt, why don't you take a second?
Okay, hi. Yeah, I'm Matt Muldoon. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Keyed-in. I'm responsible for the product direction at the company, and my background is product ownership, but also I have been a consultant, both internally and externally, and ran a consulting business for a few years. On top of that, I'm a qualified accountant. Just don't hold that against me. And I believe that the focus of product is to bring value to customers, just like PMOs need to bring value to their business. Now, actually, I have two epic sports moments. The first one has been one I've carried all my life. I happened to be on the pitch when UCLA beat Michigan in the 1983 Rose Bowl in the last play of the game, and that was pretty special. But you're going to love this stuff. I've moved to England, and just a couple of days ago, England won the Cricket World Cup in the tightest ever cricket match played. It actually went down to a count back after extra time, and that's never happened in cricket before. And England won it, so that was pretty special.
That's fantastic. I didn't understand most of the words you just said, but it sounded pretty epic. And for those of you who are domestic to our webinar here today, when he says he was down on the pitch, he was down on the football field. All right, thanks very much, gentlemen. As we begin our discussion today, we're going to talk in the context of 3 guiding principles for establishing more agile portfolio management. Now, if I were to summarize the concept, I would say that what we're trying to do is to take the principles that have improved project execution, being iterative, adapting and adjusting based on business need and customer feedback, prioritizing a dynamic backlog, all of those things that starting with software development organizations, but moving to marketing and many other departments around the company. All of those areas that have been able to more swiftly and expertly execute projects using an agile methodology, we're applying those to the top-down assessment of portfolio investments. And so the first principle that we want to tackle is this idea of managing and delivering products instead of projects. Now, Tom, can you help us understand the difference?
Absolutely, Sean. So the easiest way to think about this is when you're building a house, right? You build a house, you have a project plan. It starts with the foundation and goes all the way through the framework until you have certificate of occupancy. But that's usually where the project ends, right? You fulfilled what the initial commitment was. But that house requires maintenance going forward, right? You may want to expand rooms, paint, add tile, add other accompaniments that make your living more worthwhile. So if you kind of envision that as a product life cycle, you're starting with a known state or a baseline, and it will continue to evolve as you work through it. Products have a life cycle of their own. We start from an inception point and we go to fruition based on customer needs and demands that are across the industry. So the easiest way for me to think about it is, from that house metaphor, but also thinking about projects, right? They have a start and end date, finite resources. They're not really used in conjunction with continuing to evolve that project space because they move on to something different. That product is a living, breathing thing, and it continues to conform and utilize resource as the demands and or needs change based on the industry or the space that you're within.
Tom, what changes have been happening at Riverstone that are driving that shift for you and your team and the company generally?
That's a great question, Sean. So, I have to provide some context, right? The company as a whole came out of what I would call the dark ages of technology, where we moved off of Lotus Notes some 5-6 years ago now, where things were somewhat workflow oriented, very business driven, top of the shoulder type of orientation. And as they started to evolve or add other core systems to support our business, it was done very siloed, right? Very project oriented. There wasn't much forethought in terms of, how those systems need to play with each other, what nuances or new characteristics needed to be added as the business started to develop and expand. Moreover, we didn't really have anything that gave us a notion of this buy, sell, hold mentality that you use with a product set in terms of understanding how the markets are changing, how the products are evolving, and what new characteristics or capabilities are available. So it constrains the organization to be able to think about growth and really fulfilling on the overall strategy. Since coming on board to Riverstone in my short tenure, we've changed that mentality. We've brought forward this notion of, yes, there are projects, but in the grand scheme of things, they're towards a product life cycle. We're road mapping. We're thinking about the future. We're tying out strategy to how a product needs to be consumed, and we're keeping an eye on what's going on in the industry for consolidations and or any new capabilities that may evolve from where we are today. That's kind of where we are at Riverstone. We're in that digital transformation state at the moment and continue to look forward rather than in the rearview mirror of how a project may have succeeded or failed with the finite resources we have.
So Tom, for a team or a leader who's used to looking at the world through the lens of time-bound projects, start and end dates, and so forth, what's the best way to start this transition?
That's a great question, Sean. I mean, the way we've looked at it is we started at ground zero. We basically took the entire organization through elements of training to introduce the concepts of what Agile meant and introduce terms like value, green dollars, white dollars, process improvement. We had to make sure that everybody had that terminology stable within their mindset so that we could take them to the next evolution of this, which was starting to introduce the notion of how do you go about doing work. Agile is not something that's adopted overnight. I think most of the people on the call can reflect on that. But really the premise of what we did was we started with our business partners and the business stakeholders that were involved. We got them educated on Agile. We got them comfortable going through a Scrum. But in this case, it was around how do you improve the process? What do we need to do to optimize it, lean it out, remove the waste, and then look at what we need to do to underpin that with a technology capability. That work spanned over a couple of years, so it's not something that happened overnight, and certainly I will not say it was easy. There are times where you have to keep mindset of what your culture is, what your leadership support is, and how those teams are adopting, right? You look for those early adopters. You look to expand on quick wins and understanding how you can bring those together to celebrate and show the organization that this change is healthy. We are all creatures of habit, and behavioral change takes time. You have to be resilient and persistent at making sure that happens, and make sure that you have that leadership support to go along with it. But the bottom line is start now. Don't wait. There's plenty of information, help, and assistance from others that can come in and help you get onto the right track, or provide some guidance in terms of where to go. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's the organization adopting and adapting to those core principles and seeing the value that comes out of it.
Were any of the teams, the business partners you worked with, reluctant at first and later bought into the concept?
Oh, absolutely, Sean. I think I think everybody has this notion of the valley of despair, or the skeptics, right? You've got folks that are certainly gung-ho early adopters, those that are willing to take the risk. You've got others that will play the game but carefully watch, and then you have those that are just saying, well, this is the way I used to do work, and this is the way I do work, and I'm not changing. Really, there isn't an organization I've been in, including Riverstone, that didn't have that. So, really it's about evangelizing and getting those front runners out early, show those quick wins, show the value delivery, show how easy it was, and share the retrospectives. Aside from doing Agile portfolio management, this is a change management aspect as well. It doesn't happen overnight. So really getting at the core constructs of how you work change, how you communicate, how you show those wins, how you use those early adopters as your evangelists to drive out change is really important in this equation.
Matt, let's take a step back for a second. How can you help explain for us, how does this shift to managing products instead of projects make a company more agile at the portfolio level?
Well, Sean, when you look at the world from a product point of view, and as a product manager, it's what I do. As a product manager of a project system, I got to admit, it does change the way you focus on your projects. I mean, some of the key things that came out of Gartner this time really resonated. They have a concept of continuous next, and the idea there is that although we work on projects as individual items, they have start and end dates, that type of thing. If we move the focus to product, the biggest key is that we try to understand the value stream that comes out of every area we focus on. So I manage a couple of software products, and I look at the whole of the application. Every time we decide what we're going to do next, it's an iterative process. And sometimes, as we do in the Agile world, we make changes even midstream because we realize that where we're going and what we're doing aren't bringing the value that we expect, and we need to fail fast and move on. The funny thing is, Gartner talks about the concept of three types of product development: fear, fact, and faith. Fear being business as usual stuff you have to do to keep the lights on. Fact being items that you do to make small incremental improvements to the products you have and to make your customers happier. And faith, those projects that you take on board that may be a revolutionary change to where you're going. All three of those are applied to perfectly in the product world because each of those has a value. The key difference is that in project management, historically, the focus has been on the cost and resource management. And what we need to do is to step beyond that and for each item define what value we're going to bring out of it objectively, and then spend the time after the project to measure that value. Now, if you look at that as a product stream, it's a lot easier to do that because you're aggregating the value of a bunch of projects that are bringing you to the same ultimate value. And it does change your mentality because as you look at each project, it may be doing well in its own, but the way it affects the portfolio and a way it affects the value of the product and what it's bringing to either your business, your customers, whether that be external or your internal stakeholders, and what it brings overall changes because you look at it in a much longer time frame, and also incrementally whether or not your fear items are actually giving you the foundation to be able to pursue fact items and, more importantly, faith items, which you can't value necessarily up front, but you have the ability to do that because you're riding along in a proper manner.
How can technology help or hinder that transition?
Agility requires very immediate information. That information can come from a number of sources. Obviously, you're tracking what you're doing, your plan. You make sure that your portfolio is constantly being assessed. The world of the annual strategic planning cycle is kind of changing now. It has to be reviewed quarterly, monthly, even more dynamically than that if a priority is suddenly changed. When you do that, you have to be able to go and look at the projects that you have running and how they're doing, whether or not they still align to the strategic objectives and the products that your business is looking to create or to enhance. And ultimately, it gives you the ability to make the decisions a lot faster, and that brings you around to being truly agile.
Thank you. All right, as we wrap up our discussion of this first principle, we'll just summarize, or we have a slide here to summarize some of these principles that we've talked about in moving from projects to products. A couple of things in particular that I would highlight by way of summary is, as our panelist said so eloquently, this move to products really moves us away from having start and end date and finishing a project on time and under budget as being a benefit unto themselves. That there has to be something more. There has to be something that's delivered to the business that is an ongoing value stream, as Matt said. And I think also this idea of moving from projects to products is something that helps our teams stay relevant. If we're simply completing a request and tossing the finished product over the fence, that's what leads to line of business groups taking these projects unto themselves because they're not getting the level of service that they need. When we shift that to a product mindset, adapting to customer needs, iterating, providing continuous support, that's when that partnership between the PMO and the business stakeholder becomes an essential one, a valuable one. All right, so let's move on now to our second principle, guiding principle for agile portfolio management. And that is the idea of centralizing project portfolio management regardless of methodology. Now, this is key. Matt, can you help us understand why is it so difficult to bring all of a company's projects together in one place or one process?
Well, essentially, project teams are treated as individual entities, and the projects that they're put on have their own very narrow goals and focus. Unless you start to look above that at the product or portfolio level, as you said previously, the project itself becomes means to an end. That means to an end is simply finishing it. When you bring the business to the idea of a central focus on how we as a business are approaching the way we develop and move forward our products, what we're doing internally from an IT point of view, et cetera, the mindset changes because everyone starts to look across the business to understand the ultimate effect of what you're doing. Now, I mean, there's always going to be both waterfall and agile projects. I mean, as Tom was talking about, a house is definitely a waterfall project. I'm not sure I would want to build my house by throwing small bits out to a small team and say, go ahead and build me a staircase, and we'll come back and see how it looks when we're done. But, I mean, you can bring that together in a Wagile world, waterfall and agile together, and portions of any larger product delivery can certainly be agile, especially in your areas when you're looking at the old faith concept of trying something new. And if by centralizing it, the business can monitor the cross effect of all of this on the product, and also can make sure, again, that you're monitoring the ultimate value to the entire business. I mean, it really surprised me. One of the first businesses I came across that came to me with the concept of the value stream happened to be a governmental agency in the UK that does vehicle licensing and standards. And they had already gone through quite a transformational change to focus on this. And what they said was it was essential that they used a good tool to manage things centrally and understand what was going on, because that gave the direction to each of the value stream teams and also allowed them to cross streams effectively.
With the companies that you work with, what are some examples you've seen of workarounds that PMOs are trying to use today to bring all this together?
Well, I mean, most, a lot of them are still down in the weeds a little bit on the project level. They're trying to capture value after the fact, but they're not necessarily designating what it is they're capturing up front. They're not taking the time in the planning process to really come up with the objective measures that they would use afterwards. The other thing, of course, is that in a lot of cases, they are still treating projects as individual entities. And when it's done, and they throw it over to the business and hope somebody else manages the value. They're starting to use spreadsheets and things like that. But if they don't have a centralized view of the business and how the projects tie together, it's a very difficult and mostly time-consuming process. I mean, what we hear is that a lot of customers, their portfolio managers are spending literally weeks of time every month consolidating information to understand the position of the portfolio. The problem is by the time they've got it together, it's out of date and it's too late to make a change.
Tom, taking that a step further, can you talk more specifically about some of the project types and workflows that you have to account for at Riverstone?
Absolutely. Let me start with just the notion of what we frame. We do have waterfall projects here at Riverstone. Some of the infrastructure work, some of the things that go on from just the care and feeding of the technology environment, mandates waterfall. Why? Because you're dealing with vendors, you're dealing with circuits, you're dealing with outside providers that don't necessarily adapt or adopt in an agile fashion because the nature of the work doesn't constitute that. On the other spectrum, anything that's from a new product development that we're doing internally to support any of our core systems or new capabilities, those are done within agile teams. We bring those two together in the form of multiple tool sets that support those methodologies the best. So on one hand, you've got some aspects of Excel and Microsoft Project, and then others you've got the Jira stack using the tool sets that the agile teams are accustomed to. The challenge for me personally and for my team is bringing that information together so that we can actually constitute where we are in the portfolio, where we are in our value propositions, and where we are just from an overall strategy that says, when can we do next, right? So what we're focused on in those workflows, we've got certainly a technology workflow, which is very waterfall-esque, but at the end of the day, it actually sets up for the project charters going into a product backlog where the agile teams are then structured against the priorities and funding guardrails that have been set to go off and do that work. On the other spectrum, we've got the business projects that come in, and those business projects may or may not have a technology component. So my product management team acts as a funnel to the business, right? Thinking about that product owner agile philosophy, they're bringing in the voice of the customer, the needs, the strategy, the direction and objectives to then tie out to what work needs to be done. Working with my peer team of the continuous process improvement area, those consultants may be dispatched to actually look at that process, understand where the pain points are, go through what needs to be optimized or leaned out so we can remove waste before we put one line of code in place to support that work. In addition to that, we have the keep the lights on work, or what we like to refer to as the lights on, doors open, right? That work is continual. It's ticket driven. It's the needs and services of the help desk to come into play. So when we bring this all together, right, the challenge of not having a robust tool set that allows you to characterize and tailor to those flows and what those intake processes are becomes what Matt just alluded to in terms of a full-time job for somebody to sit and work on data that's already outdated the day it's published. So for us, it's really bringing into a common tool set, common practices where we can apply and adapt our workflows based on how Riverstone works and provide that visibility. You know, we look at it from a continuous next process, as Matt alluded to, but also a continuous value, because what we're looking for at the end of the day are the outcomes. Creating that transparency, creating the metrics so that our stakeholders and leaders within the organization get up-to-date information for how they need to look at what's going on in the projects and can be able to drill into that as they need to, regardless of what the methodology is. So that adaptation is something that's taken place over the past year and a half and is really starting to net out some very high value from the standpoint of now having access to information that once before just wasn't available or there.
Thank you. In summary, as we move off of this second concept, as our panelists have stated, this idea of crossing methodologies allows you to get that broad visibility without creating unnecessary roadblocks for the teams that are trying to execute. They get to work in the way that they are comfortable doing, while the PMO gets that vital portfolio view to look across all of it and understand the impact on resources, value, and so forth. All right, moving to our third guiding principle, it's this idea of practicing concepts of continuous improvement. Now, Matt, you spent a lot of years in the manufacturing industry. How is the concept of continuous improvement applied there, and how are we seeing it appear in the world of PPM?
Well, I mean, one of the key things of a continuous improvement, well, there's a couple, but one of them is making sure that the culture of your business is ready for change. And in manufacturing, you know, and someone get this as a Six Sigma green black belt as well, that you know, you have to involve the teams at the lowest level. They have to understand why they're doing what they're doing, and each one of them has to have a focus on the value they're bringing to the business. And when, you know, the continuous improvement concepts came through with Toyota and Kanban, that type of thing, it was amazing the results they got when they started to get the people who were doing the jobs involved in the value of doing it. I still remember a very famous story, and it was at a competitor of Toyota's where they had a line that was building electronic components, and they just couldn't get any faster until one of the guys piped up and he said, well, that's because I have to walk across the room every time here and cut a piece of cable every time I need to make something. And the simple concept was, well, let's move the rack with the cable closer to the table. And suddenly they improved their performance by something like 70%. And the reason that they hadn't done that is because people had told them that was what they should do and not asked them whether that was the right thing to do. And in continuous improvement, everybody needs to focus on that. Everybody needs to see the value. And also they need to contribute to the measure of that value and feed back into your data system so that you can understand where that's coming from.
Tom, do you have some practical examples?
Sorry, Sean. The concept of capturing that is at the portfolio level, because each project will have iterative changes, but they'll roll up and show the value to the business across the organization, because you learn from every one of those changes. Thank you.
And Tom, do you have any practical examples of applying principles of continuous improvement at Riverstone?
Yes, I think that there's two areas where this comes into play for us. You know, first and foremost, which we spoke to a little bit, was really around the work, right? The continuous improvement team that's constantly going out looking for optimization of our work processes and leaning those out. But the one that's probably more prudent and practical in terms of the context of our discussion today is how we're using continuous improvement against ourselves, against my team and the portfolio. You know, we've set up a series of different metrics and reports that we can actually track wait states and waste time and rework loops within our process, so that we can, provide the customer with a very concrete notion of, when they can expect to see things, how they want to get things entered, and can get up-to-date information about where it exists. I won't tell you that it's perfect, because it's not. But it is something that we continue to monitor and utilize to see if we can improve our own practices in terms of what we deliver out to our clientele. Very simple reports that we're extracting from the system, just to give us, overall durations and wait states, as well as what times in between and where those gaps reside, so that I can work with each of my partners, whether they be in the product team, the development team, or delivery teams, or even the business stakeholders. It's amazing what you can do when you create that awareness. But more importantly, it allows us to continue to look forward and continue to improve the processes as we use them in real time.
What's your end goal with that optimization? I mean, where do you see the Riverstone organization in a year and a half?
Well, ideally, by having some of these capabilities in place and getting the enterprise to support, all of the attributes of what we're trying to utilize with Keyed in terms of our time tracking, our allocations, our sequencing, and doing predictive analytics against that to estimate what we're going to need as we go forward. Ideally, it's really allowing some of that adaption of machine learning and artificial intelligence that we're very keen on doing, so that the teams can continue just running flawlessly the way they need to, but at the same time we're getting more prediction in terms of what we could expect as we work through any of the different work elements we have. Right? We have to understand what our process does, though, right? So at the end of the day, in order for me to get to that overarching 18-month strategy and direction, I really need to know where I am and how it's improving and what we need to do to improve that. So that notion of continuous improvement is really important to how we continue to innovate and abstract and get the information we need to actually make those decisions towards our overall strategy.
Thank you. As we think about this concept, I reiterate again to Matt's example and further what Tom said. The idea is to gain efficiency wherever possible. I think one of my favorite anecdotes, a PMO that I worked with years ago, was they identified one of their most significant delays was simply around executives making decisions. Whether they were going to choose A or B. So this PMO went and created a dashboard that showed executive names and the number of outstanding decisions that they had, and it became quite a competition between that executive team to not show up on that. So it can start at intake and go all the way through the process, always looking for ways to gain efficiency. All right, so here in summary are those three principles that we talked about: managing and delivering products instead of projects, centralizing PPM regardless of methodology, and practicing concepts of continuous improvement. Now, Tom, you're a Keyed-in customer. As we can conclude, can you offer some thoughts on how Keyed-in specifically is helping to make Agile portfolio management a reality at Riverstone?
Sure, Sean. I think after doing a pretty wide search in terms of what we were looking for, the thing that we knew going into this is that we had to be adaptable and adoptable for different workflows and capabilities as this organization continues to evolve. What we saw in Keyed-in was a really strong foundation for the typical PPO, using the waterfall methods and methodology, but quickly learned that not only can it adapt to now some of these different templatized notions about being able to do Agile or Kanban or other iterative elements, but it also gave us the flexibility to tailor those workflows as we needed to. Our process is continuing to evolve, as I've spoken to earlier. So we wanted something that gave us the abilities to do so. The other piece is that we're growing. right? We are starting to expand. We've got a worldwide operation, but we're starting to deploy this, across multiple continents, and it was important for us that we had scale. While we're not using the full scale and capability of Keyed-in at the moment, our intention by the end of the year is to be there and have everybody in time allocation so that we can actually draw upon all the great work that's going on and bring that data forward so that we can adapt and utilize some of the nuances that are coming out with Keyed-in terms of some of the artificial notions or templates that are being used for different projects, and certainly discussions about where Keyed-in's trying to go with some of the reporting nuances and how we might leverage machine learning or other artificial means to give us more adaptable and adaptive information as we plan. Can't say enough about it. It's been a great journey for us thus far, and we continue to bring new ideas to the table to help support where we're trying to go.
Matt, any parting thoughts briefly from you about Keyed-in and Agile portfolio management?
Well, I think about Keyed-in and Agile portfolio management and the general concept of bringing that into the PPM world. We are at a major both technological and cultural mind shift. The portfolio managers, project managers are no longer just isolated parts of the business that manage the resources and focus on the delivery of individual products. They are the key to delivering value to the business and should be accretive to the profit of the organization. The tools that organizations like Keyed-in have to assist in that. They have to be able to manage the process. They've got to be able to measure the value. And going forward, we have to be able to accommodate new key concepts such as machine learning and identifying patterns for failure or areas of success, and AI, so that the people that interact with our products can use English language and tools that they're comfortable with to carry that out. Each of those things is going to bring our customers and our customers' value, because it's going to speed up the capture of data and the delivery of information.
Thank you. Before we transition to questions, let me just make mention of the next upcoming webinar on this topic, if you found this valuable, and hopefully you did. On August 21st, rather, Keyed-in will be hosting another webinar on Agile portfolio management. This one is the secret sauce for sustainable business growth. And that'll be presented by Andy Jordan, a PMO expert, a PPM expert from PMI. If you look in the chat window, there is the link to register for that. Now, as we transition to questions, just a moment, we're going to put up a poll. If you have questions, go ahead and enter them into the chat window, the Q&A window. And then in the meantime, here's a poll to see if you would like to get any further information about Keyed-in. So we'll give you 20 seconds to do that. Okay, great. We can go ahead and close that poll. And we have just a couple of questions here. This first one, let's direct to Tom. Tom, this particular attendee is wondering about Jira specifically. Do you use it in your organization? And if so, do you have it working with Keyed-in?
So the answer is yes, we do use Jira very actively across all of our teams, including our business teams that they're using to manage their backlog. We are in the process of integrating with Jira into Keyed-in. Our delay in that was primarily because we're trying to standardize how some of the teams utilize Jira core elements to make sure that we have alignment for Epic's components, user stories back into how it's viewed and reported on within Keyed In. A little more of a customization from our standpoint than what out of the box has. We did try the out of the box and it does work. It does bring over everything that you can imagine that you need for user stories and activities. But we did not want to confine the team by bringing in a lot of repetitive information. So for us, it was a matter of customizing that to make it, more aligned with how our teams operate and what then we need to present out for the portfolio.
And Matt, from a product perspective, how do those integrations typically work in terms of what data is shared, and do they go beyond Jira? Do we have other customers integrating with other systems?
Oh, certainly, Sean. Yes, we have a robust API that we work with. We can manage the life cycle of an idea. And from our outbound consulting businesses, we work with things like Salesforce to capture projects, allow estimating to be taken care of. And on Jira, we will create workspaces for the organizations, and then start to capture both the results and the status of a project from Jira. The integrations, I won't say there's particularly such a thing as a standard one, especially with Jira, because everybody sets it up differently. But we have the APIs already there, and the designated data points that we move as standard, and then of course we'll customize those as organizations need and define their own systems.
Okay, another question for Tom. You mentioned earlier in the presentation this idea of evangelizing quick wins. Can you talk about some of the quick wins that you promoted at Riverstone?
Sure. I think first and foremost is the one that we did with Keyed In, not to be very specific about, relative to this product line, but, when we brought Keyed In, we had a very tight timeline in which we wanted to bring up the first conference room pilot, if you will. And we took a very small subset of our Scrum teams to put them through the gauntlet of time tracking, allocation of reporting information, and some semblance of what we need to do to enhance the configurations and potentially alter our workflows. We made it very visible, right? After the team did their retrospective on what had taken place, and we looked at some of the data, we made it front and center with the organization to demonstrate, here's how you can take a project, in a very quick turn. I think our implementation cycle is about 3 months in totality, and brought forward what the end results were so that the organization could see that. What that tripped off was our business partners actually saying, we want to be next. They saw the value, they saw the, how it was going to start freeing them and giving them transparency into what their teams were working against, but also allowed us to start tricking off some of the total cost of ownership pieces or value orientation that they again haven't had full transparency into. So we had a number of wins that came out of that, that have allowed us now to continue moving at a pretty quick clip to get the rest of the enterprise online with Keyed In, so that we can now start bringing more of that transparency and reporting forward to all of the business stakeholders.
Matt, what about the future? We've talked about how Keyed In can support this transition to Agile portfolio management, but obviously there's more that can be done. What do you have planned from a product perspective for Keyed In to support this even further?
Well, Sean, I touched on some of the items in the last section when I talked about areas like AI and machine learning. The younger users in the world, the millennials, whatever you want to call them, they're already comfortable with the concept of talking to their equipment. They're used to machine learning because the feedback they get from a number of the apps they use is based on a machine watching and generating pattern recognition. Those same things work very strongly in the PM world. I've been involved with a couple of these projects with other companies like Sage as well, and this is something that we've got to focus on at Keyed In at the moment. The other areas are looking at taking just beyond the pure portfolio view and looking about how we help customers embrace their change. So some of the areas are measuring in an objective way the culture and the acceptance of the projects or products that we're managing. So constantly using things like surveying tools to understand to get an understanding of how much our customers want, use, and accept the things that we're doing, and that will help us change and become more agile in our ability to drive value.
Tom, we had another question come in specific to your use of Keyed In. It says, Tom, as a Keyed In customer, what part of the tool do you find most beneficial for managing the portfolio?
Wow. Let's see. I wasn't ready for that question. Well, I think there's a couple of areas, right, that really provide some benefit to us. So first and foremost, everyone hates timekeeping or time tracking, but at the end of the day, the way we've positioned it and the way we believe in this is that by understanding the effort that people are putting in, not just the hours, but the actual effort that's going in to help support our product areas, it's starting to bring awareness to just what it takes to get new product developed, what it takes to sustain it, and what it takes to actually sunset it. So I think from an awareness standpoint, the data coming out of time tracking has been hugely successful and important. I think the other piece that we're leveraging very heavily is some of the internal reports to Keyed In, as well as the external API for our Power BI reports. We're using them in conjunction with each other because we're providing a dashboard to our middle management team so that they can stay abreast of what's going on within those things that they've sponsored, whether it be tracking, costs, understanding where they are in the schedule, seeing the key decisions or deliveries been made, but also the data that's coming out of Keyed In from the overall collective that's allowed us to enable our Power BI capabilities to allow not only our senior leadership visibility into the overall value proposition going on across the portfolio, but also the enterprise as itself, end users, trying to understand what are the priorities, what value are we getting from it, how are they tied to my goals, how am I contributing to that. So it's been an enabler from a standpoint of really allowing transparency across the enterprise to see what's going on and to weigh in on those priorities. Because frankly, at the end of the day, when we first started, it was 40, 70 projects deep and not finishing any. Today, it's first in, first out, finish and focus. So we're bringing the value right up front, making it visible and delivering on it as we work through that. And that's what Keyed In has helped enable. So that from that standpoint alone, just getting transparency and easing the burden on my team to constantly manipulate Excel or Word or PowerPoint documents has been a huge relief.
Thank you. And that is all of our questions. Thank you so much to our panelists. Excellent job, excellent thoughts. Matt, thank you for joining us. We know it's a otherwise big week for you with a wedding going on, so good luck with all that. And Tom, as always, excellent insights and continued success to you and your team.
Thanks so much.
Thanks to everyone who's joined us. As I mentioned, this webinar was recorded and it will be shared with all the registrants a little later this week. So thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.